All right. Hello, Agnes, and hello, Werner.
Hi, hello, Agnes and Robin. I'll just say briefly, I wrote my Chicago essay about you guys, so I was very happy to be invited. Thank you. I guess if there are any Fate School seniors in the audience, I can't recommend it, but I do
Right.
anyway.
Your essay of what sort?
My essay is trying to get into the University of
An
Chicago.
application essay.
Yes, yes.
Do a little
Right.
apologize
No, it didn't work.
that they didn't give me your application to read because the very first year that I was, on the faculty at the University of Chicago, the admissions committee said to me, "Would you look at some, college applications?" Uh, and they gave me, like, 10 of them. And I went through them, and I'm like, "Guys, all 10 of these people are amazing. You just have to admit all of them." And then they never asked me again after that. But they were all so much better than me. They all had straight A's, they all, they were, it was like a different echelon of student. Anyway, so they if I had been more critical, then they would keep giving me them, and then maybe I coulda gotten yours, but I screwed that up.
Mm.
Um, okay, I think you guys should introduce our topic.
Werner wrote an essay on his blog, Gray Mirror.
Well, this isn't my blog. This is
Okay, right.
this is the boss's blog, Curtis Yarvin, my former boss,
AKA Mencius Moldbug.
aka Mencius Moldbug. Yes.
Okay. And it's about the origin of woke, which is a popular topic these days. And your distinctive position there that you summarize a bunch of other people's positions, but your distinctive position is focusing on the signaling of pro-sociality, that is generally being, kind and considerate of other people who are different from you and worried about inequality is pro-social, and woke is signaling that. And then also the signaling of intelligence and status by the fact that this continues to evolve to be somewhat icky to ordinary people or somewhat hard for
Yes.
ordinary people to embrace. And that's a continuing function of the signaling story. You also distinguish woke, say, from a previous era of Marxism and say it's a similar sort of structure in those two features. But by comparison with Marxism, Marxism was mainly separating people from by having this huge literature that you had to read, and people could master that, which is less about it being icky and more about it being hard to master that way. And also, you say that differing kinds of people has become a more salient feature of our world than it was maybe a century ago.
Yes.
Um, so any other distinctive features of your position that I missed here?
No, that sounds about right. I think, the two really distinctive things is the stuff I just took from you, the elephant in the brain stuff, and then also which you talked about a little less, the demographics being the thing that tipped the scales away from Marxism and towards wokeism.
So Agnes and I did some podcasts and discussion about modernism.
Yes.
And we talked about how initially with modernism, there was this idea that the past was not what we were going to embrace. We knew we were going to have some different stance than the past, but we weren't sure what it was going to be. And there was this era of fumbling and searching in the space of sort of different ways of framing social relations and all sorts of concepts to find another way to be a modern person. And that Agnes suggested, which makes a lot of sense to me, that World War II, the world wars, was this moment of anchoring when the modern world said, oh, we do know something about morality. The Nazis were wrong and we were right. And that's become a moral anchor since then. That is,
Yes.
analogies to whatever the Nazis had wrong and we had right by comparison to them have become salient anchors for new moral communities and ideologies and religions.
Yeah.
And so that
You probably know Nick Land. He makes this point very eloquently that we have an inverted Christian. He says an inverted Christianity with Hitler as the Antichrist. That's a kind of popular thing in modern discourse.
but
Yeah.
it's an alternative account of
Yeah.
why the switch from, say,
Mm.
econ issues for Marxism and identity issues in more recently is that World War II was the break point, and that soon afterwards, the major issue in the U.S. was civil rights with respect to race. and then gender followed on somewhat naturally from that, and then homosexuality and trans, etc. That's another story of the switch.
Yes.
Can I ask a question about your view? Um, so, um, people who are woke, the emotion that I would um bring along with that, of like the most characteristic manifestations of woke, or at least an important emotion, is anger. And like if you're not angry, you're not paying attention. That is like a woke. It's woke. Like you're woken up to be incited to emotion. And anger is a not prosocial emotion. And it involves like characteristically saying that there's a set of people in our world that I'm not going to be friendly to. Um, and so that just on the face of it, it looks like wokeism does the opposite of what you're saying that it does.
Yeah, there are definitely aspects of wokeness that are certainly not pro-social, and, I think it's always, I think there are a lot of phenomena in the world that are rooted in pro-social things, like religion, you know, the the the, the micro foundation is pro-social. It's good to if you believe in a god that will punish you for doing bad things when no one's watching. But then we also have flagellants. We also have these like crazy sects that are certainly not pro-social. And I think wokeism, there's the pro-social micro foundation, but when you get to these crazy sects, they have beliefs that are these beliefs are good for the belief. It's good if you're always animated by this belief, if that's what the belief expects you to do, but it's not that part isn't pro-social.
Seems to me that a more accurate summary would be that all ideologies and religions have to pick some pro-social element to advertise as the reason why those people are good, but they pick quite different ones, and then they also have many behaviors that are contrary to it. So that means this idea of pro-sociality doesn't really pick out from all the vast space of possibilities what particular pro-social thing that a particular community is going to emphasize. But
Yeah, but the explanation of wokeness, it's not that strong an explanation because you would just say this about any ideology. It exists because it's pro-social and because signaling that you're pro-social is useful. Which that would include, for instance, anti-wokeness as an ideology. You would explain it exactly the same way.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's true. Yes, all ideologies are rooted in something pro-social, but I think we should put more emphasis on the pro-social part. Like there a lot of people have written about the origin of woke. It's a kind of in vogue topic, and I think this is generally what people miss is the pro-social, and there are some concrete predictions you can make by I think more thoroughly understanding it that the others have not made.
if you look at, say, conflicts between some kinds of feminists and trans people, they're both trying to be pro-social, but in
Yeah.
different ways. So clearly, we're not going to understand that conflict if we just say they're pro-social.
Yeah, yes, yeah, certainly not. And I should should probably I should maybe spell it out a little bit more. Got like the specific kind of pro-sociality is it shows that you could cooperate with people who are very different from you. Um, and
But not politically different. You can't cross her. Killing that.
Allowing different things, yes. Like this is a deep diversity. This is a very shallow kind of diversity, but that's very important in the modern world. In the areas like elite people hang out in academia, these are just like very very culturally and ethnically and racially mixed places compared to almost any other such places in human history. And I think it is kind of useful if you know someone can thrive in that kind of environment. It makes you a better employee and a better citizen.
So I think that I think the thing that you're talking about, which is being able to signal that you're able to cooperate with people who are quite different from you. I agree that's super important part of our world. I think, for instance, economists try to do a lot to signal that they're that, without being woke. But they're like Robin. But in general, like they love immigrants. They just love people who are different, especially first generation immigrants. Those are the best kind. And they generally like they like places that are far away, and people in the places that are far away, um, and but also poor people. So that's like another difference. So like it seems to me that the practice of signaling like I'm okay with people who are different from me, or like, oh, you come from this other place, cool, they'll be like the cool, don't tell me more about it, but cool, like we're cool with it, it's fine. Um, I, I guess that just seems like um that's there's so many other manifestations of that than wokeness. In fact, often it really does seem to me actually that anti-wokeness is an attempt to signal that, like, to signal, "I'm cool with all kinds of people." Um, and like, I agree with the idea there's a new thing we all have to signal. I'm just not sure that the woke have any monopoly on that. That is, in terms of who is doing that the most, I'm not sure it's the woke.
Well, I'm willing to presume there's just more of a random element in which pro-social things get focused on, but uh, I I'm puzzled by the distinctive features that are apparently here over a long time period that are maybe different from all past eras or most past eras. So, uh, most religions, including Christianity, Islam, Hindu, Confucianism, etc., as far as I know, I don't recall a description of them as continually trying to reinvent lots of complicated specifics in order to evade being popular.
Yeah.
That might be in common with Marxism and woke, but it's different from all the other ideologies and religions in history that I'm aware of. So it seems that stands out for a
Yes.
an explanation. Why is that so different? And that's part of
Yeah,
part of the
that's a
cancel
good
culture
question.
thing.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
in past eras when there was a religious dogma, the people who were canceled were people who were like trying to be different from the dogma and have a different religion. Whereas today you often get people canceled accidentally who can't just manage to keep up with the continuing changes.
Though I think I would say, like, if you looked at, like, the early Christianity, that's a kind of in vogue topic. Someone recently published a book on it. Scott Alexander reviewed it. I think
That's not a recent book, actually.
oh, okay. Yeah, so I suppose not that recent.
Decades old, yes.
Decades old book. Never mind. But when ideologies are new, they're really in flux, and things change a lot. Eventually, they ossify, and maybe they're
But that's not actually a decent description of the early Christian church, rapidly changing dogmas. That's that.
ooh,
So I just read, this book on the history of Christianity, which
yes,
is like, by actually, yeah, Paul Johnson. And also read the other book by Rodney Stark
yes.
on Christian religion, and Christianity changed a lot over the last 2,000 years. That was the most striking thing I learned about thing, but it changed on, say, centuries, timescales. Every 2 centuries, Christianity would be different, which gives 10 different Christianities over 2,000 years, which is striking, but it wasn't changing on the timescales we're seeing today with woke, for example.
Yeah. So this is much faster, but I think, like, there's a time when things are kind of up to ground. Where is the Pope going to be? Is he going to be in Rome? Is he going to be in
Right.
Ham-
But when that changed over 2,000, when it changes over 2 centuries, that really isn't an effective way to separate out the people who can't keep up with the changes. It's such a slow change that's not really doing that
pretty
social
new
function.
thing. It's true. And, like, do we have a euphemisms treadmill? That's like a very, like, just an example. Like, that's a very obvious example of, like, when woke things that they're just changing, like, on the order of years or months. And can we see this in history? Probably not. Maybe it's technological. Maybe it's communications technology.
Okay, can I like take a really giant step back? And in effect, here's what I want to do. I want to um like Werner, in your essay, what you're doing is like taking a step back from these two the coughness and the Rufo, like you're saying I'm gonna explain sort of what causes them. And I want to do that to your view.
Yes.
Take a step back to it. Um um so um I've been recently reading a lot about like the sociology of conversation, and I've been very struck by the fact that there are all these little rules that we don't even notice about how, in general, in conversation, you're trying to do something without being explicit about the fact that you're doing it. Not always, like not 100%, but like 95% of the time. Like it's amazing. So, for instance, if I want you to say your name, um, most of the time in conversation, I don't say what's your name. I would say something like, "Hi, I'm Agnes." And then you would say your name. Uh, and so it's like I'm trying to elicit your name without asking you for your name. Okay. So there's a kind of and all of these rules, sort of what they add up to is like we're nice to each other. Like, I'm not gonna make demands on you. I'm not gonna do things where you then can ask me for justifications. Conversation is very egalitarian. It just by its nature, not forget about politically what context you're in. It's there's a conceit of equality just in the practice of talking, suppression of status differences, um, an over eagerness to give credit and to avoid blame. Okay, so in a conversation, it's like we're the way that sociologists sort of explain this is like there's like some harsh social reality. One sociologist referred to it as like schoolboy rules. There's a harsh social reality where like you get credit if you earn credit. And you might suck and you might be dumb and we might not like you and whatever. There's a harsh social reality, but in the conversation we suppress that. And we pretend that we live in a soft, beautiful little world. Little world is one of the phrases that they use. Okay. And this is, according to the sociologists, I've read total human universal, every culture over every time. I don't know if it's true. That's they're saying that. All right. So here's the thing that puzzles me about this practice of creating a little world. The bigger world, the world that we're protecting ourselves from, is not actually the external world of reality governed by physical world or physical rules. It's actually another social world. It's the social world that involves things like credit and blame and honor, right? That's also social. So basically, here's a weird thing we humans did. We created a social reality, the big social world. Okay, we made it up. It's fake, in a sense, right? Uh, it's filled with honor and moral responsibility and blame, etc. And then we made another second world where we lie about that first world we made up. Okay. And that second world is like conversation or certain kinds of socializing. Okay. So sociability, Simmel calls it like the world of sociability. Right. So we have the real world that's out there somewhere. Okay. That, we're all having to interact with some of the time. Then we have the big social world, which is social reality, a social world that we constructed. Maybe it includes racism. Maybe it includes some people being honored more than others, etc. Then we have the little tiny world of the interaction. And it seems to me that um, a lot of what happens with like sometimes people say, "Oh, being woke or political correctness is just being polite," and I think there's something to that. Namely, that's the um almost everything that's woke is sort of recognizably the world of the little world. And so this is it's the whole thing to me is incredibly puzzling. Like, why do we make up this one world? Then we make up a second world to pretend that the first world that we also made up isn't there. Um, but so we could talk about that. But I guess my thought is like, that when you talk about like signaling pro-sociality and like that you're nice to people and whatever, basically what that is the space of the little world, and also you're good at pretending like the little world is the big world. And I guess my thought in answer to Robin's question about modernism is that it's not that the world has more different kinds of people in it than it had in the past. Actually, as Robin has taught me, the world used to have way more different kinds of people in it than it does now. France used to have like a whole bunch of different subcultures in it that all got smooshed out by Paris, basically, and different languages, and right. It's not that the world has gotten more different. It's just that the world has gotten more connected, and somehow that extra amount of connectivity has sort of thrown in more into relief this issue of the conflict between the little social world and the big social world. And in effect, like this conflict and this tension is like just more present to us, and our not resolving of it is more present to us, and we're kind of like constantly having to resolve the problem of pretending that the little social world really is the big social world, and so constantly running up against the fact that it doesn't seem to. And so the euphemism treadmill is like, okay, I'm going to solve it again. I'm going to solve something like that. It's a vague thought.
But it seems to me that in this framework you gave, which makes sense, say the rise of woke is a rise of a change in the definition of what the outside world seems like from the inside world and what about the outside world is threatening to the inside world. So, for example, uh, in the woke stereotype, this acknowledging any differences by which women are worse than men would be seen as threatening and not something you're allowed to acknowledge in the inside world. But any ways in which women are better than men is fine.
Yes.
That's a new
Me-
definition of what the outside world was that didn't exist before.
Right. So what I think the difference is in the degree of coordination across different conversations, different times and places about which aspects of the outer world we recognize from the inner world. So the way that I'm imagining it, this conflict has always been present, right? And it's always been the case that inside of a conversation we observe social niceties, which is to say there are features of the bigger social world that we don't acknowledge. But they're different in different conversations. If I'm with a group of if I'm a man and I'm with a group of men, like we're gonna say some stuff about women, and there's some awkward stuff about men we're not gonna say. If I'm a woman, and there's just stuff you can say depending on the group that you're in. But the advent of like really, really good technology for communication means that um uh, that the that there's just this attempt at coordination, that there's just a standardized set of things, a standardized way that the outer world has to look from the inner world in every context. Like even in my home, since we're talking, and um uh and in Ticket to Ride, sometimes we call the do you guys Werner, do you know Ticket to Ride? Okay. Well, in Ticket to Ride, it's a game and we play it, and there's one of the trains is rainbow. It's like there's red and blue and yellow, and there's the rainbow one. And sometimes we call it the gay train. And my kids will be like, "Uh-oh, we're gonna cancel you." And like, but there's almost this threat of like, well, maybe cancel culture will happen inside of our gameplay. Because even in that world, actually, even in the home, even inside of a game, we can feel the presence of these rule of this drive to coordinate how the outside world looks like the inside world.
Or except the drive to coordinate, and then presumably also to coordinate to exclude people who can't keep up with the rapid changes in the coordination. So it's a coordination at the expense of others.
Yeah.
So that's just always gonna be true. That part's universal, right? So um 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 when I'm with men in the past, okay, maybe it's true for men now, I don't know, like bunch of men getting together, what they're doing is coordinating to exclude women, and they're like, yeah, those women, whatever, they say bad things about them. That's just always been true. But of course you're right that the exclusion is going to hurt a little more if you're now excluded from every context. But it's not different in that it's excluding, it's just different in that it's coordinated.
Yeah. I mean, could you do like cultural economics work to just like actually see if like people like if it seems like conversation is more homogenous across these different contexts? Maybe. I don't know. It sounds hard.
I mean, it just seems completely obvious that one of the major features of the modern world
Yeah.
over centuries is this increasing degree of communication and contact
Yeah.
and increasing integration of cultures around the world. And that's just
Yeah.
been a steady trend for the last century.
So yeah, that would like certainly be true, and obviously like around identity issues, we could just see that like absolutely things are getting more homogenous. Like it maybe 50 years ago you would use slurs privately. Now it's anathema.
Right. So my point was to say to take so Robin had a question. Why is this happening now? Why are these changes happening more quickly now? And what I'm saying is, um, I tried to find a way to take another data point, namely, um, the tech rapid increases in technology of communication, and use it to answer Robin's question. Except I had to go way out to the sociological predicament in order to make that work.
But we have to postulate that a larger world in more communication naturally evolves these things faster. Then that might be true, but it does require some other argument that implies that.
Right. I guess my hope, yes. Okay, good. You're right. So my thought was something like, um, the I think you need two things. So one thing is you need to the thought that more communication means more coordination across these different communicative scenarios on the question of which aspects of the outer world are permitted to be visible from the inner world.
There's more discussion of the specific thing.
No, just that like everybody agrees that we can't be sexist to women, but we can be sexist to men, say. Um as opposed to an earlier world where in some contexts you could be sexist to women, in other contexts you be sexist to men. Um so so it's just a homogenization of the conversation. So that's the first point.
Yeah.
And then the second point is, why would the homogenization cause the rapid, like the euphemism treadmill, right? And that, so there's still explanatory lacuna there. Um, and I guess my thought is that actually this this thing where we made a bunch of stuff up and then we made another bunch of stuff up to pretend that we didn't make up that the first thing isn't there. It's not very stable. Like that's already unstable because we can tell that we can see the problem. And I guess my thought is, I think that this tissue of lies is starting to break. Basically, that this whole scenario is not working for us, partly because of this coordination, and so we're constantly having to fix it. So my thought is, so this is an alternative explanation for the euphemism treadmill. Your explanation is, oh, we're trying to keep people out, and so we have to keep coming up with a new word so that the people who are in know that they can't.
I think this is like a minor part of the
Well, it's a major phenomena, so any explanation is a major important point. So
I think information isn't the main thing, but it's like keeping non-wokes out of the signaling.
well, it's also the time it takes to get used over the ick, right? So part of your story is we pick a new ick and I think the ick.
I think it
And it takes a time to adapt to that rather
But
than
I think it's ick over information. I think the information goes fairly quick.
but it's still a
Yeah.
a keeping people out phenomenon.
Yes.
Right, but so I guess here's my thought. Say we have a word for a group of people, and that word accurately reflects the bigger social reality of how we think about those people. Namely, they're not as good as the rest of us. Let's say let's say the word is crazy. Okay. So there's some people and they're just crazy. And so then inside of our conversation, we're now talking, and maybe we don't want that to in our conversation because maybe one of you is crazy. I won't say which. And so I want to be like, oh, maybe I'll say different. Okay, instead. And so now we've moved from crazy, which is the way that we talk about that phenomenon from the point of view of the outer world, in the outer world, of its place in the outer world. Inside our conversation, to soften things up, we're going to say different. When we say different, that move from crazy to different is really similar to the move from, what's your name to, hi, I'm Agnes, right? It softens it a little bit. It's like, it's not any more or less a lie than that, right? And we're doing all these things all the time, and there's something very selective about being anti-woke. That is, you just happen to notice the few of these things that really irritate you instead of the giant pervasive web of them that we're all trapped in. Anyway, so when I say different, it feels softer. But now when we keep saying different, over time we start to realize, well, different just means crazy, and different starts to be freighted with the truth of the social reality of how we think about crazy people, which is that they're worse than us. Yeah. And so now we just need to do it again. We now, special. Okay, now we move to special. And in fact, then there's a next move. There's another level of this where it's me, say I'm people sometimes call me special, but I know that what they really think is that I'm crazy. Let's just say it. Let's just say it out loud. I'll identify as crazy. I'm going to appropriate it. And now I'm going to soften it in this funny, reverse twisted backwards way where it's I'm actually proud.
Is that a counter signal, I suppose? That's one way of reading it.
So, but my point is this progress that happened, it wasn't because we wanted to keep anyone out. It wasn't because we wanted to show that we were better than the other people. It's because the thing starts to break down of its own because we notice that we're just making up a story about another story.
Right, but you still need a reason why this process is happening much faster now than it used to.
Right, but my hope was the communicative technology was going to give us the answer to that. That is that we're just somehow doing it so much across so many different contexts, and we're coordinating across those contexts, and that's making us notice, bringing it to consciousness.
let me offer an alternative
Okay.
process, which is this idea that we, in the modern world, have come to see ourselves as purposefully, consciously trying to make changes. That is part of our ideal of ourselves is that we are wanting to and achieving change. And that wasn't part of the self-consciousness of people centuries ago so much. Usually, sometimes it was. But when you have a community that sees itself as purposely trying to achieve change, and maybe even we are trying to help cause change in a larger world, then these rates of change make more sense in the sense that people will eagerly jump on a change as a way to show that they are causing change and up with the change that they are trying to cause in a way that wasn't there centuries ago.
So and to try to like get more of where you're going with this, it's like you this you see as a side effect of cultural drift. This is a symptom of our drift.
Well, the fact that it can happen is a symptom of the drift. That is, in past eras, people may well have initiated such things,
Yeah.
but then when it went off the rails, they were punished and disciplined more quickly. And in the modern world, there isn't that discipline. So that would be the cultural drift framing of it.
And it's like it's in your individual interest to cause change for different reasons, but it's bad for the group, or like it could be bad for the group because it will change the culture, which is
All through history, presumably, all little groups initiated changes in the sense that they created little cults and they had little factions and groups of heretics that they would
Yeah.
have different concepts and they would change their concept of many things, including marriage and work and property, all sorts of things. But typically, it would just quickly go off the rails in such a way as that those people would just be punished for that. And that's what limited it in the past. That would be the cultural drift story. And that in our rich world, we aren't so quickly punished for such things. And so they can continue longer than they would have in the past. But the key idea is that you have rapid change commonly when you have a small group of passionate people who see themselves as different and see themselves as trying to cause change. And then their change of language over a short time or change of behaviors or moving to different locations can then be seen as a validation of their trajectory, which is part of their self-concept. We are on a trajectory and we are trying to be on a trajectory, and that changes we can point to would then be proof that we have achieved something of a trajectory.
I think our theories are not that different, Robin. And I can't believe I'm the one saying that because you're always the one saying that. But I think there's just a question. Yeah, okay, why are we trying suddenly to make changes? And I give an explanation of that, which is sometime around 1900, humanity woke up. Sociology, it basically it's then, right? That's when Simmel is writing around 1900. Goffman's going to be a little later than that. But all these novelists are writing around that time. Okay, what did they wake up to? And I think the answer is, well, the little social world and the big social world. That is, hey, we made a bunch of stuff up. Is it the best stuff? Could we make it up better? So first and foremost, it's actually the big social world. The idea that it's constructed, the idea that it could be constructed differently. I don't think that that's something that people have always been aware of. I think it's something that they come to an awareness of. So I think there's an intellectual change. There's an intellectual, like a light bulb turns on. And I mean, you can see it turn on in all these novels across all these different novels across Europe, many of whom are not in communication with each other, writing like the same novel of being like, what's valuable? I don't even understand anymore. And that's what, modernism, that's what we've been talking about, Robin. And I guess my thought is that it's at that point that the idea of change starts to make sense, right? It's like, well, look, if we made it up, maybe we can make it different. And so then there's this project of doing it better and of wanting to do it better, basically not taking social reality for granted as a given. And I think so. Okay, one more step in my I mean, I can't believe you said this was plausible, Robin, because like I made this up an hour ago. So that's a really good sign. I'm often telling Robin like ideas, and then he like, recently he's like, "That's plausible," and I'm like, "You could have said something nicer than that." He's like, "That's my highest compliment." So now I know that's Robin's highest compliment is that something is plausible. Okay, so thank you for that compliment. Um, but here's the next step. Okay, it's very, very weird that we would make up a social reality and then make up a second social reality about how that first one's not there. Why would we do that? Why would we have been doing that for like, across every culture for all of human history? Very weird practice. Well, maybe we need a social reality to live in. That is, human beings need to live together in a certain way where they need like rules for like, what's our thing that we're doing? That's the first step. And then second, like they often don't like they also need to think that it's better than it is or something like that. They need to think that the social reality in which they live is like somehow perfect or really good or whatever. They don't want to think we made one up and it's like it's just sort of okay. Like, you know, if what the way we look at like human sacrifice societies, we're just like, whoa, you guys have really bad social reality over there. Um, if you were in that society, you would have to think, no, it's actually warm and cozy. And you'd have the second the little world is the world in which you tell yourself that the bigger social reality is a really good social reality. Okay, so we're now in the situation where we're like trying to change and we're seeing ourselves as having agency in relation to the bigger social reality. And that just does funny things to the relationship between the bigger social reality and the little one that tells us that the big one is good. We're suddenly much, much more able to see that we're like lying about it. So people are able to write books like The Elephant in the Brain, where they just see a bunch of stuff about like the lies that we tell. Why did the lies that we tell have now become visible to someone like Robin? Someone like Robin 1,000 years ago just wouldn't see any of it.
Well, I think you know maybe more about the sociology of religion than I do. I don't know if you've done work on this, but like I guess you could find some antecedent of this in like Confucianism. Reification of names will take the names that we use in like the small social world and like and make them more consistent with the ones in like the real social world. And like so like maybe you can find like isolated examples of this. I'm not sure where that would fit into the model.
So, I mean, religions have
Yeah.
certainly had this ideal world that they see themselves as trying to achieve and that they are closer to in their religious communication with each other and the religious events and interactions, right?
Yeah.
So certainly a standard concept of religion is when we together are being religious, we are closer to this ideal world that we are trying to achieve than when we are ordinarily at work or having sex or things like that. That's definitely a common concept of religion. And then often religions have had this idea, and we want to spread this religion to others. And so we have this project of spreading it. And then maybe we are trying to get closer to our religion. We see ourselves as not having gotten as close as we could, and we are trying to be closer. Um, but even then, I mean, except in small sects that are rapidly growing or things like that, we don't tend to see such rapid social change as we're seeing in our world today in terms of our concept of ourselves and what we see as acceptable and things like
Yeah.
that. So that's still a distinctive recent feature to think about how to explain. Um, but so I would just, I mean, I would go back to this, say World War II telling us that we did have some values. And what were those values? Well, those values are, well, there's bad people and we're supposed to be opposing them. And that we can tell what they are from us from these key values of equality across ethnicities and other sorts of added on categories. And that we are seeing ourselves as activists trying to do that, not just via war, but via other political pushes and social pushes.
Yeah.
And that they have become, in some sense, the heroes of the modern world. The most celebrated people are activists who are seen as consciously trying to change culture, and we want to be associated with them, and they are trying to do things. Often changing vocabulary is a thing they explicitly say they are trying to do in the service of their activism, campaign.
You took a different moral of the story away from that conversation than I did, Robin, in particular away from my point about World War II. Which is my point was not it all started in World War II. My point is World War II has distracted us from the real thing, which happened around 1900. There was a thing that happened, uh, which is in effect, sorry, Robin, about precedents, but we realized cultural drift. Uh, that is, we discovered cultural drift at this point in time, and then Robin rediscovered it later. Um, and why did it have to be rediscovered later? Well, because of World War II, got kind of still distracted about like objective morality and stuff. Um, but in effect, there was just this crisis about how we're supposed to be and how we're supposed to live, and like, you know, the thought that like our cultures are just arbitrary frameworks that are thrown upon us through the accident of birth, um, and that maybe we could have like better versions of them. Um, I think that maybe what World War II did was something like make that look like a pretty straightforward project. Oh, just find the bad guys and get rid of the bad guys for at least a little while. And then there, civil rights continued like, okay, we can make the right culture by fighting the bad guys. But where we are now is a lot closer to where we were in 1900, I think, where it's just less clear who the bad guys are. It's less clear that, I mean, we've been fighting racism and sexism for quite some time. With the Nazis, I mean, we fought them for a little while and then we got rid of them mostly, right? So that kind of worked out in one logic, but it's not working the same with sexism and racism and even homophobia and trans. Like, it looks like something else is going on, something that's more like the morass that people felt like they were in 1900.
Well, the question is how many people in our world see it that way. So I agree that, I mean, actually not that many people ever read any modernist literature or read sociology at all. So a range of people who had these doubts were pretty small range of the world in 1900. And then it might have gotten less and is more now compared to, say, 1950, but it's still a pretty small fraction of the world. That is, most people do think they are onto some right morality and are eager for something like that. And the customers for woke are people who looking for something like that, and it's offered to them there. That is, that gives them this absolute moral framework and who the good guys and bad guys are and their place in it and how they're pushing for good things. And there's a big demand for that.
You have probably taught fewer introduction to philosophy classes than I have, so I'll tell you that on day one of an introduction to philosophy class, what you get as a teacher when you sort of introduce like ethical questions and stuff, it's like you're at a firing squad of um we don't teach like philosophy in high school, but what we do teach in every part of life is how to avoid philosophy. And you get that back at you. So who's to say what's right and wrong? Isn't everything relative? Isn't it just about a matter of how we use words? It's all just subjective. Different cultures think different things. It's like they're every tool in their toolkit to make this philosophy stuff stop, right? Um, and are like these are first year undergraduates, okay? So they just finished high school. They don't have an incredibly high level of intellectual sophistication. They mostly have not read modernist literature or sociology, but they have absorbed what they've absorbed from their culture, and what they've absorbed is um, something about the fruitlessness of the moral project. And it is me who has to bring up the Nazis. I'm like, guys, aren't you at least against Nazis or something? I mean, do I have anything to work with here? Have you ever been angry at anyone in your life? And when you were angry, did you think who's to say what's right and wrong? Or did you think I'm to say because I'm angry at you and you did something wrong? I got to do that work for them because they do not want to say that there's anything like any objective morality.
So almost everybody agrees about, say, the origins and strength of woke because it's primarily seated within and coming from prestigious academia. That's
So I'm teaching them to be woke by teaching them that moral questions have answers.
no, maybe you're countering other teaching elsewhere, but the net effect is there's a lot
But
of
I wasn't saying that by way of saying it's obviously false. I was just clarifying.
no, but still there is these we can identify these two tendencies, one of which is to have doubts and wonder, like where could you find a place to stand to talk about moral questions? And there's this other tendency of people who think they very much have the answers and are pushing them and are even punishing people who question their point of view. And woke is clearly more like the second than the first, I think we can agree.
Uh, Wait, tell me the two things again.
One is this generic doubt, the modernist doubt of well, now that we understand that our morals and our society is socially constructed, how do we have any principled way to judge? And the other is maybe the World War II inspired path of we do know the right answer. And here it is. It's about equality and anti-racism, anti-sexism,
Or
etc.
we're not separate. I think they're not separate. So like that is, I think that was my point about you. Your moral is different from mine because my story starts earlier. Um, the World War II thing is like an answer to something, and it's that doubt that makes you want to have an answer. And so, but like this is maybe an argument a little bit in favor of, I think it was Rufo, the critical theory thing, right? The like so you might think, look, most people did not read modernist literature. It's hard to read, right? Among other things. I mean, most people don't read literature or novels, and these are like the hardest novels to read. And maybe most people don't like, read sociology or, whatever. And around philosophy, all that. But they didn't used to. But then slowly everybody goes to college. Like we changed our world in which now so much of the world really does pass through educational institutions. A lot of those institutions have like requirements. At the University of Chicago, you have to take a humanities class. So, it won't necessarily be a philosophy class, but it's gonna be something in this flavor of, um, it's like the humanities side of the culture, the two cultures, right? You're gonna get some of that, and what that could be is inculcating people both in the doubt, that is, exposing them to modernist doubt. Again, as I say, to some degree, they're already exposing the culture, but and to this kind of panic need to grasp onto a moral system that will solve the problem that that doubt creates.
I do think that a lot of the power of ideology and religions has long been highlighting within you your temptation to do the opposite of what it suggests. I mean, Christianity got huge mileage out of telling people, aren't you tempted to sin? Can't you see that inside yourself? And aren't you, shouldn't you acknowledge just how sinful and base you are? And that was very effective at producing enormous emotional energy in Christianity because people are fighting it in themselves as well as outside of themselves. And that's part of modern religions and ideologies to see that temptation. So say the Marxists see inside themselves the temptation to enjoy being rich and enjoying the fruits of capitalism and enjoying their dominance over other people. And you're making people feel guilty, high status, relatively rich people, in Marxism, by showing them this temptation in themselves and having them, asking them to be repelled by it and to try to fight against it. And then you've got this strong, and of course, racism and sexism are similar sorts of things. You show people how tempted you are to be racist or sexist and to be horrified by that inside yourself. And now that gives you the energy to be trying to fight it in yourself and to believe that it's elsewhere. So if you see it yourself, you can find it very plausible and it's all over the place elsewhere, and other people aren't finding it nearly as much as you are.
And this is a very interesting phenomenon. I'd love to see this spelled out more. Like, is there a connection to like the Waluigi effect, the famous thing in AI? Perhaps
What is that?
What is that?
that if you try to align AI to do a certain thing, it makes it very easy to also make it do the opposite. Why? It's like not really well understood.
You're making the axis salient,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You tell me, never, never do a mass murder. Never mass murder. See all these mass murders. You should never want to do that. Now, when I'm really mad, it's one of the options in my head. Oh, mass murder. Maybe I could do that.
Yeah. I mean, sounds like Hegel, right?
Right. So, I guess I think that one way to explain that kind of effect, and even the stuff about the temptation, is that if we think that there are specific things in the bigger social world that the smaller social world is trying to insulate us from. So, um, let's say just, it could be racism, it could be, the way in which wealth gives you status, right? Um, and I mean, there's always going to be some, like, whenever we're protected from something. And so in protecting you from that thing, I think it's gonna be like just a side effect of it, that that it can draw attention to that same thing, because that's the thing that you're always not supposed to be thinking about. Um, and maybe somehow that effect has gotten stronger. I believe that. I believe that that effect has gotten stronger all the time. That is, I think even it's surprising how woke we are, but it's actually just as surprising how anti-woke we are.
Yeah.
Like, anti-wokeism, the power and the intensity of anti-wokeism is very surprising, and it grows up so quickly, and then it's so, like, it's a big force. You'll kind of immediately encounter it. It immediately organizes people, like, um, and, and maybe um it's like, well, I keep thinking of all the things I'm not supposed to say. And maybe even more so than in earlier times, like when Christianity dominates, it's like, don't think about sex. Like maybe that just kind of worked a bit and people just didn't think about sex as much. Um, but like we're now at a time where when you tell people don't think about X, they just that move just doesn't work. So that's me saying like the tissue of social construction is like getting thinner.
But, I think there's also like an effect that like, um, if you have an ideology, you want there to be really hard, like an ideology thrives when there are very hard boundaries between the people who support it and oppose it generally, or like at least that's a model that kind of works.
I mean, but most religions in history dominated in a particular area, and most of the people in that area were in favor of it, and the people against it were faraway people they never met much, right? So that's a change in the modern world. Then if
Yeah.
we're so eager to see the opponents and we have them around
At
us.
least you could definitely think of some examples of like moral panics around heretics and things, and
Well, we make up some strong witches around us in order to have somebody to be against, but that seems to be somewhat different than just knowing that they're all around you, I guess.
I don't know. Like even that like if there's ever a situation where you have to even invent opponents, like having real opponents, you would think would be better than that. I think this is a model that like can kind of work for ideology.
I mean, although strikingly, in some sense, the woke scenario is where they're really looking to find racists, and almost nobody will claim to be a racist. And it's hard to find anybody who will claim to be racist. Even sexist is hard to find anybody. So most of the anti-woke is saying, we agree with you on the basics, but you've gone way too far in all these performative, uh, you know, things. And that's the woke, anti-woke conflict as we see it, which isn't so much people revealing themselves to be the people the woke people say they're fighting.
Yeah, I jump like it almost feels to me like ideology is this thing that came into existence around the same time as the term ideology came into existence. Um, that is, like, of course, in some sense, there have been, you know, beliefs that people held about social reality, and we can call all of those ideology. But, but the thing where one group of people is accusing another group of people, like even in the ancient world, where they'd be like, okay, you have your gods and we have our gods. Like there wasn't some big thing of like, well, yours are fake ones that you just made up. It'd be like, no, like, okay, we can even agree on some of them, or we can incorporate, or you call it by a different name, or there just wasn't this sense of, like, battling theories, um, and, um, I guess there must have been something like that around the advent of Christianity, something in that family, um, uh, but it still feels like the modern phenomenon of this kind of, um, uh, equilibrium that we kinda have, like this equipoise where, like, in a way, the stronger woke gets, the stronger anti-woke gets. That feels like something new to me.
I'm not sure how exactly it's relevant, but the anecdote just came to mind. I just recently visited Cuba, and um, you know, my wife was hoping to like go there and get some Catholic, icons because she likes to collect those things, and they just weren't for sale because there's just hardly any Catholics in Cuba. Even though every town has a Catholic church in the central square, maybe apparently only 15% of Cubans are Catholic and 15% are atheists. And the other 70% are people who sort of have various African religions mixed in with Christian symbolism. So they've merged various Christian saints with various African deities in a mixed idea where so they all get baptized because they all accept the Christian symbols as being symbols of something powerful that they also have African names for. But in fact, um, you know, and it's striking how I read this book called Montelieu a while ago about sort of 1400 Europe, France, where basically they they accepted various Catholic symbols, but in fact, they didn't really understand Catholic dogma.
Yeah.
A lot of their behavior was quite at odds with Catholic dogma, but they didn't understand that. And so there is this phenomena where people sort of embrace some abstract symbols, but they don't really agree on what they mean.
Yeah.
And then they have an identity based around various rituals and symbols. And there's a fair bit of that with folk in some sense. We do the land acknowledgements ritual, but we're not exactly sure how that's being anti-racist exactly. But
Yeah.
we collect these practices, right? Maybe acknowledging pronouns and using pronouns. And there's a sense in which a lot of religion through history has been via rituals
Yeah.
and names for things and symbols of things. And it's actually unusual to have coherent dogmas and, you know, whole theologies that, because most people don't understand those and can't really assimilate them. What they can get is a bunch of concrete symbols.
Yeah,
But
and the syncretism phenomenon seems a lot stronger in religion though than like our modern stuff. And why? I don't know. It's complicated.
it seems to me what's distinctive about us is that we are going to complain if we don't see why the land acknowledgement actually fights racism or how the pronouns actually help anyone. That is, in the previous time, they would have just gone, yeah, okay, we do a land acknowledgement. But now we got this whole group of people who's like, what is this land acknowledgement all about? And like cynical about it and want to expose it. That and so that's the tissue. It's like we can't just have our rituals anymore, right? We somehow now need to have people like Robin Hanson writing books about how these are just rituals and we're lying to ourselves. And like you can't that world does not sustain itself is what I'm saying. Like and, as I say, I don't blame you because I blame these people in 1900, but um, it's that we can't keep having like a set of lies piled on another set of lies and also have an entire industry of people whose job it is to excuse those lies. Like that system is not sustainable, I think. That's basically my explanation.
Well, could I propose rudimentary model? Just ideas that obligate you to spread them do better. You know, in
Sure.
tend to do better. But ideas that that weren't obligated to be spread have done like in the last like 2,000 years
Sure.
kind of been displaced by ones.
But
just-
obligating to spread an idea that's too complicated to actually spread, like a
Yes.
Marxist theology,
Yes. Yes.
is also as a problem, right?
True. Yes. But is it so crazy that like the ideas that like that seem to really dominate like Christianity and Islam with like billions of people, they're not that complicated, but they're really, really obligated to be spread. And it's like, yeah, of course we have a world that's like dominated by that.
So what I've been saying is the principle, ideas that obligate you to spread them do better. The operation of that principle is not going to be unaffected by people's realization that it is in operation.
And
There is an economics word for this. It's the something effect. I'm not remembering it. It's one of the things Tyler sometimes brings up on his blog. But that your theory had better take into account the potential effect of the understanding of this theory. And I think people are often not doing that, and so they're not seeing that like if you're anti-woke, you're spreading woke for this reason. And vice versa.
yeah, can it be unaffected? I think it's mostly unaffected though, right?
So it seems like a really central issue here, and it must have been an issue in the past,
Yeah.
is the difference between intellectuals, professors and college students, and the kinds of concepts they can understand and engage, and that, counter arguments that they will be relevant for them, and then mass culture and ideology and religion, which has to be much simpler. And so you've described part of the process of, say, woke as evolving toward stances that give ordinary people the ick exactly to make a separation between. But that is a novel new thing. So part of the novel new world of ideology/religion is this desire to have a distinctive elite religion or ideology that can show that you are elite by separating you from them. And
Yeah.
then that induces rates of change in them that are historically unusual. And the question is, but like you say, woke is more popular than, say, Marxism was, exactly
Yeah.
because it's more accessible. So,
That kind of makes the elite part of the argument go away. I also think the first part of the argument about
And it's certainly less elite.
Right. How intellectuals live in a different world from everybody else. That's just less true when everyone goes to college.
Mhm. Yeah. And it's still actually less than half of people going to college, or at least graduating.
Okay, fine. But like a third is a lot.
Although I'll note this probably changed college a lot more than it changed like everyone into elites. But there are two
But
competing
I mean, woke is actually not a thing at the bottom 2/3 of colleges either.
yeah.
And so, I mean, the woke activism is primarily a feature of the most elite colleges.
But I'm not just talking about activism. I'm talking about uh people like being exposed to I don't know. I have a friend who teaches at like a community college that would be like close to the bottom, in a bottom tier. And like his philosophy classes are pretty similar to mine. I've talked to him about like what he teaches, and I've gone and done Zoom sessions and talked to his students, and like they don't seem like some other kind of human to me. They respond to me intellectually in pretty similar ways to the ways that my students respond to me. So I think I think it does make a big difference that um everyone is like, whereas my parents who didn't go to college because where they're from, there's no like liberal arts. You just go and like go to your profession after high school. Um, they actually find a lot of this like conceptual space just incredibly confusing. Um, and they're like, they really, really struggle to keep up with like the new thing. It took them took like my dad super long to get on board with the gay thing, and now like he's finally there. And now with trans, he's just confused as to what's going on. But I think that people who have picked up this kind of conceptual architecture of human rights and stuff to a greater degree than my parents have, um, are find all this stuff less difficult, and it's harder to separate by way of an elite.
Elite overproduction, huh?
Well, we're nearing end of time, but one obvious question that is the thing everybody talks about when they talk about woke is it over? So focus, your essay suggests if you're looking at fundamental processes, these haven't changed, so you shouldn't expect this to be over. But a lot of people we know are celebrating that with the election of Trump, woke people seem to have shut up for a little while, and they're discouraged and backed off, and therefore they're saying, and that's all over. Phew. What do we think?
I think, woke has kind of changed. I noticed them on the internet in my daily life. I think the median like kind of elite American is definitely to the right of what they were like 7 years ago, 10 years ago.
So how's that been with any of this theory that you've given us? Go ahead. Any of these accounts make sense of that?
I think woke has like changed a little bit. I think it's less negative, and we're still going to be signaling that we're good at cooperating with like people who are very different than us racially and in other ways, but we might do this in a kind of less invidious way. But yeah, I think you need hard social science to really assess this kind of question.
I I guess one thing is that it seems to me that claims of is woke over or not are often the province of one group really wants to claim victory. Another group really wants to say, I'm still a victim, potential victim of cancellation. And like, so there's like that whole dynamic going on. Like, no, I still have reason to be really afraid, or we're finally winning. And so that like obscures like what's actually happening. Um, so I agree with Werner about in effect the objection that I first raised to you, which is like, but it kind of doesn't seem very pro-social, is I think actually the objection that it's like there's like all these people, I don't know, some like elite people in publishing or whatever. Like they don't want to be not publishing books because these people they want to publish the books that will make them money. And so they want to go back to like let's kind of try to be nice to more people so that things can work. And so it's the pro-social, it's the anti-sociality of wokeism is causing problems for wokeism. And so it's in a way self-destructing on its own principle of pro-sociality. But what that might just mean that it changes to now our new consensus of what it is to be pro-social. Maybe that's gonna be more like, oh, it's being pro-free speech. That's being pro-social. That probably won't be very stable either. So My prediction is it is going to end eventually, okay, when we clear up this giant mess that we've made by constructing a pile of lies on a second pile of lies. And we are clearly unhappy with the situation. We're clearly wanting to see through it, but the incentives are complicated. And as soon as we start seeing through it even a little bit, what we start to do is like form a group of like-minded people who will pat each other on the back for having done some little, seen a little tiny bit through it and call ourselves smarter than other people and just get dumber by means of associating by means of that group. And so like the progress is slow because these same social dynamics are get in the way of the intellectual progress. But I almost have this hope that, like, maybe it'll speed up sort of as we start to, like, take off from the sociological goo that we're trapped in intellectually. Um, yeah, it will get easier and easier to free ourselves from it, and then eventually it'll all be over, and humanity will just, happily philosophize together in my utopia.
I grant that Agnes's large, dramatic, long-term resolution is possible and maybe even desirable, but I'm not going to bet on it in the next 10 or 20 years. That seems pretty unlikely. So I'd say we've had like a long period here where the world wants a substitute for religion. Religion is on the decline. People want ideologies. They feel a passionate need to have some meaning in life and a cause they're behind and a sense of progress that they are contributing to. And the long string from, anti-Hitler, civil rights, feminism, pro-homosexual, pro-trans is such a long trend with such a coherence to it and such a huge inertia to it that I just find it hard to believe that's over. I could see it taking a different direction a bit, but I think whatever different direction that is, it will make sense within that long history of being something like, the path that led up to it. So that's the question of what new moves can be if they're in that space. I do think there's a sense of overreach and maybe defeat along the recent path, but it's just hard to see how people will interpret that as the whole thing being a mistake. That seems just implausible in the short term, although in the longer term, more believable. But I guess that's it for us today.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us, Werner.
Thank you.